Radio TV Phono Nut here, and we have a 12-inch General Electric, in name only, black and white television from 1983. This is a Korean-made set. Previously, General Electric made their 12-inch black and white sets, well, most of them anyway, in-house, and most of them use the 12XB series chassis, and then there was also a 15XB for the 15-inch sets. GE made those from about 75 up until about 82 or so, and then they realized that it was cheaper just for them to get their small screen black and white sets rebranded rather than build them in-house. So the long-running USA-made XB chassis sets were discontinued, and then they farmed out to places like Samsung and Gold Star to build their sets. Now this one here, I've had it for years, but I've never really messed with it. My former preacher, they found it in the attic of his house. They didn't even know where it came from. He didn't even know it was up there. So it was given to me. And here's our information on the back of the set. Chassis number XJ-A, and then General Electric, made in Korea. And on the back we have our controls for contrast, vertical hold, and horizontal hold, and it looks like the shaft is missing out of our horizontal hold control. And then we have our standard UHF and VHF 300 ohm twin lead connections that are a little bit rusty, so this set got a little damp in its lifetime. So we'll now open it up, see what it looks like. This does power up, and it has a raster, but it could benefit from the usual tuner and pot cleaning and any other little minor details that we might have to tend to. And here we are with the back removed. We have a Gold Star picture tube, and I recognize this chassis as being a Gold Star. And by the time this was made, the majority of your 12-inch black and white sets, regardless of what name was on the front, were made by either Samsung or Gold Star, and these weren't very good televisions. The original XB chassis American-made GEs were a lot better than these. And I've seen this same chassis in an Emerson set, different cosmetics, but same chassis. In fact, I saw the Emerson version of this a few months back at one of the thrift stores, and I asked them how much they wanted for it. She didn't know, so she goes and gets the guy out of the back, and he's like, "Oh, that TV's not for sale. You could buy any TV in this place except that one." And of course, all the other TVs in the store were your generic black plastic and silver plastic crap. And I asked him why it wasn't for sale. I said, "It's sitting out here on the floor. If it's not for sale, it shouldn't be out here." "Oh, well, that was a mistake, but we use that as a radio. We can pick up radio stations on this." And I'm thinking, yeah, sure you can. So then he plugged it in and proceeded to show me, and all he was getting on it was a bunch of noise and static. At best, he might could have picked up 88.1 on channel 6, but that would have been about the extent of it. What I should have done is told him, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you can demonstrate to me that that TV will pick up every AM and FM station in the area, then I've got a $100 bill in my wallet that I'll give you for it." But I know that wasn't what it really was. What it really was it was a TV that had a little age on it and had knobs on it. So he had it in his head that it was worth a bunch of money. So instead of telling me that he was going to put it on eBay and sell it, he had to come up with some cock and bull story as to why they weren't going to sell it. And I haven't set foot back in that thrift store since. You know, don't insult my intelligence. Now, the biggest issue on these cheap sets that sent them to the junk pile was the CRT. It's been my experience these little small neck picture tubes didn't hold up all that well, and they would not rejuvenate that well. And the Gold Star and Samsung tubes of the 80s were the worst ones. And then on occasion I'd run into a bad flyback on one of these sets, and that usually sent them to the junkyard. Although I remember one set, it was a late 70s Sampo that the flyback was bad in a place called MCM Electronics. You might remember them. I think they had the flyback for under $10, so I ordered one, fixed the TV, and turned around and sold it for $25. That was in the very early 90s. Today, as I've proven time and time again, I could have a 27-inch set, color set with a remote, and couldn't get $20 for it. So times have definitely changed over the past 30-something years. Alright, I just sprayed all of the pots. I have not sprayed the tuner yet. I really need to get that out so I can clean it thoroughly, because I can tell you I can tell by wiggling the knob that it's got dirty contacts. But it looks to have a fairly bright raster, so maybe the tube's usable anyway. Alright, here's the tuner with the cover slid back enough to where I can access the contacts with our spray cleaner. So we're just going to hose it down and rotate it back and forth about a G times, and hopefully that'll clear up the dirty contact. We'll just keep doing it like this for a little while. Get that cleaner worked in really well. And these types of tuners weren't that great either. And let's face it, this was a $69 TV whenever it was new. And back 40 years ago, that was cheap for any kind of new television. So, like everything else, when the price drops, so does the quality. Because if they built these things to the degree that they built them, say, 10 years earlier, they couldn't sell them for $69.95. Since that's what the public wants, is cheapest possible price over quality, then that's what you get. And a lot of these tuners, even after cleaning them, the contacts would be worn out in them, and they just wouldn't work that well. Alright, we're back together and have a raster. Now this UHF knob is cracked and either needs to be repaired or replaced, but that's no big deal. We're not going to be using UHF anyway. As long as channel 3 works, and that's really all we need at this time. Well, we have sound, but no video to amount to anything. You see, we've got a picture, but it's very, very noisy, noisier than it should be. So this is what we have so far, and yes, I did connect it to the VHF terminals. I remember years ago I was at a TV repairman friend of mine's house, and he had a Zenith Chromacolor 2 console up on the bench working on it. He couldn't figure out why it had a very snowy picture, and I happened to glance at the back, and he had his cable clipped to the UHF terminals. I unclipped it and clipped it to the VHF terminals, and TV was clear as a bell. Needless to say, he felt like a total idiot, but that kind of stuff does happen. It happens to all of us. This reminds me of DXing out-of-town TV stations back in the analog days. You could get something, it might not be all that great, but at least you had a picture. Now in the digital world, it's either all or nothing. And this is not one of those memory set fine-tuning controls. This is an ultra cheap one where you have to set the fine-tuning for each channel, and then you'll probably have to reset the fine-tuning when you get back to your previous channel. I will say this, it looks to have a pretty strong tube. I've got the brightness all the way down, and it's still plenty bright enough. funny thing is, I can touch the top of the converter box and the picture gets worse, and I know it's not the converter box because I took it off of another TV and it was working fine. One thing I've learned over the years is before diving into performing in-depth troubleshooting procedures is to always cover the basic stuff first, is in eyeballing the chassis, resoldering any questionable solder connections, and correcting any other thing that's obviously wrong. Well, I did resolder some connections, mainly these big power resistors, none of which I think would be causing our problem. But I removed the metal shield off of the bottom of the circuit board under where the IF circuitry is, and we had some of that nasty brown glue across here and across here, and the purpose of that, I believe, was to hold the shield in place while it was soldered. And what happens is glue over time tends to become conductive, and it can eat away the traces, and we can see there's some obvious after effects of that glue right here. So we're going to take a meter and we're going to meter out these traces and make sure they're still good, and if they're not, we'll jumper across them. We can see this trace has got a little bit of copper exposure where the glue was, and if that glue became conductive, it's highly possible that it provided a path between one trace and another, and that could have caused some problems. Alright, resoldering things didn't really help the situation. In fact, it may be a little worse. But when I put it on UHF, we're getting some digital noise coming through here on some of the channels, so we know our UHF tuner is working to some degree, but we don't have any UHF channels, so I don't know how well that would work since analog's gone. So yeah, it may be time now to dig out the more advanced equipment and try to troubleshoot this. Probably going to be in the tuner, but need to make sure. Alright, back on the little GE black and white set, we have a piece of equipment here that I don't believe that you've ever seen me use before. It's probably because I don't think I've ever used it before. Back in the early 90s, a friend of mine who had a TV shop, actually he started in TV repair back in the mid-70s, and then he got out of it in the early 80s, and then he got back into it around 1990, and then he got out of it again around 2000 when the state of TV repair just got to the point where it was just really not worth it anymore. But anyway, he paid about $10,000 for all of that Syncore equipment, which included this piece, another piece that I think is some type of sweep circuit analyzer. There was an oscilloscope specifically made for TV use, a capacitor analyzer, and an isolation transformer / variable AC power supply. Well, at the time he got out of the business, he tried to give me all of that equipment, but in clear conscience, I couldn't accept it because I knew what he had paid for it all those years earlier, about $10,000, and at the time I just couldn't accept it. So he ended up just taking the equipment to another TV shop that he did work for, and it just basically got stored there. And then he decided to go pick up the equipment, and the other TV shop wanted the capacitor analyzer, so he left that with them, and then he brought me all the other stuff, which, like I said, was this piece of equipment here, that sweep circuit analyzer, that scope, and an isolation transformer. And he told me, he said, you know, I really wished you'd take this. I have no use for it. I'm not getting back into TV repair, and all it would do is just sit at my house. So he said you would get more use out of it than I would. So here it is. And honestly, I haven't used it that much because, you know, for me, I hadn't done a whole lot of TV repair, not in comparison to what I did a long time ago. In the TV repair that I have done, I was able to do it without breaking out the heavy artillery, as they say. So what we've done here, we're feeding an IF signal out of this piece of equipment into the television, and yes, I need to open this up and clean all the pots and clean all the switches. They're all very touchy and hard to turn, but it works good enough to output an IF signal. And as you can see, we have a clear image on the TV. The geometry needs to be adjusted, but that'll come later. But as you can see, we have a clear image on the TV, so that pretty much points to the tuner most likely being at fault. And I'm really not that crazy about digging in this cheap Korean crappy tuner to try to fix it. So if I can figure out a way to turn this into a composite monitor, then that's what we'll probably do. And since most of the converter boxes, most if not all of them, have composite output, we can just eliminate the tuner altogether. Now the only problem with that is this is a hot chassis television, so we're going to have to come up with some kind of way to isolate our inputs from the chassis. And probably the best way to do that would be to use optocouplers, or optical isolators as they're sometimes called, and just do it that way, because I just really can't see tearing into this tuner, and I figured that's what the problem was in the first place, but I wanted to make sure. And this also has the ability to output standard RF channels, pretty much anything you want. Cable channels 2 through 99, standard cable, or what is this? Programmable cable 2 through 99, standard cable, and our standard TV channels 2 through 83, so we can obviously select VHF or UHF channels to input into the front end of the tuner. And of course, when troubleshooting any power transformerless hot chassis equipment with AC operated test equipment, you should always just plug the equipment under test into an isolation transformer to prevent possible damaging the equipment and or the test equipment. So just better to be safe than sorry. Alright, we're going to reattach the IF to the tuner, and then we're going to just play around and run some RF channels through the front end of this and see what it does. I want to see if the UHF is any better than the VHF. Alright, there we are on channel 3. We've got audio, but the picture is not that great. It's better than it was before, but I think we're feeding this with a hotter signal than before. And I think we're out of alignment, because when I set the fine tuning for best sound, we have no picture, and when I set it for best picture, we have no audio to speak of. Alright, I set our output down to about what it should be, and that's what we get, and that's comparable to what we were getting before with a regular signal. Now if I feed RF channel 3 into the tuner, and with it cranked way up, I have the output level on medium and cranked almost all the way up there. You can see we have a relatively clear picture here. All this is our connections are not that great on our antenna terminals. That's the reason it's flickering a little bit. So yeah, you pretty much have to blast a signal into this tuner to get anything. Sometimes these isolation networks on the antenna input can get damaged, so I just bypass those, and since the TV is plugged into an isolation transformer, we can do that. So I just bypassed those with our signal generator, and that did not improve the situation any. So in our AGC control back here seems to be functioning normally, so it does appear that the tuner is at fault here. switching gears away from the TV a minute, this is a little Columbia, probably a one-tube wonder phonograph that I just got in. It's in exceptionally nice condition, probably from the mid-50s, and it appears to be still working on all original parts. Well, we'll look inside in just a minute just to be sure, but it does work, as you can tell, and that's just a testament to some of this older stuff. As cheap and low end as this was back between 65 and 70 years ago, it's still working today. But today you buy a Crosley Cruiser that's considered cheap and low end, and it's probably going to be junk in short order. Alright, schematic stamped on the bottom. Found a date of 1956. I think this was probably made by Symphonic for Columbia. And like I said, single tube amplifier. But the main thing is that the cartridge is still good. That's usually the showstopper for these. Here's the tuner with the cover removed, and our problem is most likely on that circuit board. But getting this tuner apart to actually be able to do something with it would be a royal pain in the butt, and would probably end up being more trouble than what the TV's worth. And I can promise you, when these were new, $69 TV, no shop would have gone to that much effort to service one of these. If they'd have taken the set in at all, it would have had to have been a simple, quick repair, like shorted diodes, a bad capacitor that was easy to find, something like that. Anything more in depth, then it just wouldn't have been in the customer's best interest financially to spend the parts and labor. They could have gone out and bought a new set. In fact, a lot of shops got so they quit taking in these kind of sets because nobody wanted to spend what parts and labor would have amounted to, even if it was just a simple repair. Alright, now what I'm trying to do is determine if this video chip has the detector built in it, and I figured the best way to do that was to get the number off the chip and cross-reference it. Well, I can't see that in the television, so I tried to take several pictures of it to see if I could see it that way. Well, wouldn't you know, none of the pictures came out readable. That was one of the nice things about the Canon camera, the better camera that I had that died. I could take close-up pictures of parts, and I could actually read the numbers on them. So now I'm going to have to pull this chip out of here and put it under my magnifier and see what the number is, and then try to cross-reference it and get a data sheet on it and see what's in it, and then we can go from there. Yes, apparently this does have internal video detection. It doesn't have an external detector diode, and it looks like our video output is pin 3, so we'll try feeding a composite source into that, and since we're using the isolation transformer, we can go ahead and feed that directly out of, say, the converter box and see how it looks. And then we'll, once we determine everything looks right, then we'll determine how we're going to isolate this. Alright, I haven't connected the audio. That should be just a simple matter of going into the volume control. But the IC is out for right now. We have our line level video coming out of the converter box, going straight into the pin 3 connection on the circuit board. And you can see we have a beautiful picture, except for all the digital dropout from our crappy converter box and our crappy antenna, which is no fault of the TV. Okay, so my ultimate game plan here is to reinstall the tuner with the knobs in place, of course, and all that will be for at this point is decoration. It will serve no use whatsoever. And then we will mount our jacks on the back of the television somewhere, and I plan to use stereo audio jacks that are wired together for mono, and that way we can plug a stereo DVD player or whatever into this without having to use an external Y adapter to sum the left and right. And as far as the audio input to the TV, that should be a simple matter of just disconnecting the original lead on the high side of the volume control and running our audio from our external device to the high side of the volume control. And of course we will use shielded cable to make all connections between the jacks themselves and the television chassis. Now that still leaves the hot chassis situation. If I were to connect the negative terminal of the jacks directly to chassis, which is circuit ground on this television, and if I were to plug, say, a DVD player or a DV or DTV box with a metal case on it into this television, then that could make the case of said device hot as a firecracker, and that could be a dangerous situation. Now, this television does have a polarized plug, but it's been proven over the years that a lot of outlets are miswired, and if you were to plug this into a miswired outlet, then the case of the device plugged into it could very well be hot. And also, depending on the conditions, you could blow up something. So let's just say you plugged a product into this television that had some kind of fault where the external ground that on the jack somehow had a connection to the internal circuit ground, and you plugged it into this television with a hot chassis. You could destroy the TV, the product being plugged into it, and of course you could also end up getting a nasty shock or worse. So how are we going to combat this problem? Now, I know on record players, the way they generally do it is they have a capacitor connected between B- circuit ground and the chassis itself, and then the negative side of the cartridge, which is often connected to the metal tone arm as well, will connect to the chassis of the record player amplifier and not circuit ground. In fact, I've got a little Lafayette standalone stereo amplifier that was mainly meant for record changers, and it's a series string job without a power transformer, and it has a capacitor between B- circuit ground and the chassis, and then the ground pin on the RCA input jacks, of course, connect to the chassis. Now when you connect a record changer to that, it's not a problem, because on a record changer, generally speaking, the only thing that has any part to do with the incoming AC is the phono motor. The cartridge itself is totally independent of the AC wiring coming in, and all it does is the cartridge connects to the phono input on the amp, and that's not a problem. However, if you take something like a CD player, cassette player, tuner, whatever, granted, most of those devices will have an internal power transformer, but a lot of times there will be a small value capacitor connected between one side of the AC line and ground. So when you plug such a device into something like that little amplifier, the hum level is so bad it's just unusable, and reversing the plug on the amplifier does not work. The only way I've found to get around that is to bypass that chassis isolation capacitor, which at that point places the chassis at B-, and then you plug the amplifier into an external isolation transformer, and that's the only way I've found to plug something like a CD player into that amplifier and not get bad hum. So on this TV, I think we will try the cap trick and maybe put a large value resistor in parallel with it. They also did that back in the day too, and we'll see how that works. If that does not work satisfactorily, then we'll have to try to come up with some kind of optocouplers to go between the jacks and the television chassis itself. Now, I could buy an isolation transformer and shoehorn it in here, but that would look very tacky if it would even fit, and the isolation transformer would probably cost more than what this little junky television's worth. So I'd like to try to find an alternate method if possible. But as far as the tuner in this set, the only way that would ever be needed in today's world is if, say, you had a very old video game console that had RF only output, in which case you could probably find an old VCR that has video output jacks on it, AV output jacks, connect the video game to the RF input of the VCR, and then put the VCR on channel 3 or 4, whichever your video game requires, and then run the video output jacks, AV output jacks from the VCR to the jacks on the television. And another situation might be is if you were one of the few that got industrious and built your own cable head end, if you will, in your house, whereas, say, for example, you had a master antenna feeding a bunch of DTV converter boxes, and then you'd run the output of your DTV converter boxes through a modulator tuned to whatever channel you wished, and then ran that all throughout your house, and that way you could use the tuners in your vintage television sets. I've actually thought about doing something like that, but it's not really that high on the priority list. If you did something like that, of course, you would need the tuner in the TV, but all in all, I think at this point, the best way to make this TV useful is to just forget about the jacked up tuner in this set and just go with the composite input jacks, and that should be just fine for most uses. Alright, I've lifted the input to the volume control. We have our audio from the box jake-legged into the television, and we have nice audio, and we have a nice picture on the screen. Can't show that for very long because of the content, but all we have to do is get around this chassis isolation problem and we'll be in business here. Something I was thinking about, the first TRS-80 computers from the late 70s, what about 77, 78, the monitor that those came with, and here's one I found on eBay, those were actually just a modified RCA 12-inch black and white television. I have the TV version stashed here somewhere, but I couldn't place my hand on it if my life depended on it. But I've never actually seen the inside of one of these monitors, but I'm told that what they did was just took a regular 12-inch black and white television design, eliminated the tuner, and eliminated the IF module, and then ran a and then basically turned this into a line-level video monitor. Now, I do not know if these have a built-in isolation transformer or if they're using some other means to isolate the video input jack. I'd like to find a schematic on one of these, and then we could find out. And as far as our little set, it's currently playing right now. It's been on a little while, and before I make the modification more permanent, I'll probably place a 75 ohm termination resistor across the video input jack. We'll try it and see how the picture looks, and then we'll probably be best to use some coupling capacitors in line with the positive lead on both the audio and video jacks, just as a precaution to block any DC that might be present. And then that ought to do it. And probably what I'll do, I'll probably just eliminate the antenna screws and just mount the jacks and the holes where the antenna screws formerly were, and then that way I don't have to drill any holes or anything like that in the cabinet. And of course, if by some mere chance somebody wanted to reverse the modification, they could put the little antenna screw thingies back in the bracket and convert it back to a regular TV. But it's probably about a 99.99% chance that that'll never happen. Once I convert it, it'll probably stay that way until it'll probably be that way whenever I kick the bucket, whenever that is. Hope it's a long time away, but you never know. But it'll probably remain that way until my time comes to an end, and then when somebody comes in here and starts throwing everything in a roll-off dumpster, then I'm sure that TV will probably be among the things that get disposed of. Here's the back of that Radio Shack monitor. Right here is where the two antenna screws would have been. These RCAs didn't have separate VHF and UHF. Everything was on the single two screws there. And of course the model tag has been ripped off, but surely there's another one on here that I can get the model number off of. I doubt Sam's covered this, but there might be a schematic somewhere. Now I finally found one with an intact model sticker, and it seems some of these had a green cover plate you could put over the screen. Why didn't they just offer them with a CRT with green phosphor? But anyway, this was manufactured April 1979, so I was a little bit off on the date. Made in Taiwan in RCA's plant over there for Radio Shack. This one here looks like it has the video cable coming out the back to plug into the computer. The other ones I think had them coming out the front. I don't know which came first, but model 261201. Let's see if we can find a schematic for that anywhere. Alright, I found a schematic for that monitor, and no, this does not have an isolation transformer in it, but if you'll notice, our power supply ground here, you see that's shaded, but if we move over here to our video input, our signal ground here is not shaded, so we need to find out what they're using to isolate the two grounds. And if we look at the inputs, this is just what I was envisioning, a 75 ohm termination right across the jack, and then we have a 100 microfarad capacitor with the negative end of said capacitor connected to the center pin of the jack, and then the positive end goes out to our circuitry in the monitor there. So we need to find out what they're using to isolate the grounds here. Well, it appears in this set you got your video preamp transistor, and then you have a noise filter, and then it goes over to this IC that they call an isolator. So it looks like that's what they're using to isolate the two grounds here. Pin 5 connects to B-, and then it looks like pin 2 goes down here through a capacitor, a 0.01 cap that's in parallel with a 10 microfarad cap that connects to our isolated signal ground here. So yeah, this is not going to be quite as simple. I was hoping to see just a little simple capacitor and resistor network that they might have been using to isolate the grounds, but no such luck. But it looks like the output of our preamp goes into this IC here, and then the output of the IC goes into our video amp. So this is some kind of optical isolator, apparently. So yeah, very interesting how they're doing this. Alright, Z1 is a 6N135. Now I'm wondering, without having those preamp transistors ahead of it, that probably means that if I were to go that route, I would have to incorporate that circuitry in that television, because there's probably, I would imagine there's probably some loss through that IC, so that's probably why they have the preamp transistors there, to bump the signal up, so to compensate for the loss that you would get through that IC. But we'll see what we can come up with. 6N135, can I find any kind of information on that? And that's exactly what it is. NTE 3092 opto isolator open collector NPN transistor output. Alright, we could probably do this, but it would be rather complex putting everything together. So we're going to look into some other alternatives and see what I can come up with, and then make a decision once I explore all my options. Now, they too could have just put an isolation transformer on the AC input and they wouldn't have needed all of this, but transformers cost money. Transformers are big and bulky and heavy, so to keep the weight of the monitor down and to keep expenses down, they did it this way here. Alright, here's the TV, still Jake leg connected out here, and it's got a nice picture on it. So I think now we're at a stopping point, and I think I'm going to try to come up with a small isolation transformer that will fit in the bottom of the cabinet over here under the tuner. Hopefully I can come up with something. And then another advantage of putting the video audio input jacks on the antenna terminal board is if I or somebody else needs to remove the back to service the set, they won't have to worry about the jacks getting in the way, because they'll be on the antenna board that is not attached to the back cover anyhow. Actually, this way it has a better picture than what it would have with a conventional RF input, and you won't have to worry about the audio buzz that's sometimes encountered on these little sets like this with the RF input, so that's a good thing. Here's the switching power supply out of a Sony DVD player that I had that bit the dust, and I scrapped it. And on this particular model, they have a 100 picofarad capacitor connected between each leg of the incoming AC to ground here. So I took one of those capacitors off, and we're going to try to use that capacitor to isolate our jacks from B- on this set. We're probably going to have issues with hum pickup, but we won't know until we try, and if it works, great, then I won't have to go any further with this. Well, unfortunately, that's not going to work. I'm still plugged into the isolation transformer, but what we're getting is a lot of noise in both the audio and video, so it looks like the only way we're going to get around this problem is to use an isolation transformer, if I can find one that will fit inside this cabinet. And here we are without the capacitor, and as you can tell, it's clear as a bell, so let's try to find an isolation transformer that will fit in this cabinet, preferably right here in the area under the tuner here in the bottom of the cabinet. Alright, we're making progress with the conversion here. I ran a shielded cable from the volume control, the hot side of the volume control and ground, up here to this terminal strip, and then we have a 22 microfarad capacitor between that point and the cable up here that's going to be going to the jack, and obviously I have the terminal strip soldered to the tuner housing. As far as our video, I left the video IC out of the set. I'll probably just put it in a piece of styrofoam and put it in a baggie and tape it up inside the set somewhere. And then we have our video lead running down here soldered to the appropriate spot where the IC was. And I also put the metal shield on the underside of the circuit board. We have that lead running up to another terminal strip here with a 100 microfarad cap in series with that going to the jack. And I've got to get some jacks to put in here. Obviously I removed the UHF antenna terminals to make room for the jack, and I took the UHF lead up here out of the way. It's sandwiched in there pretty good. It's not going to get in the way. And then of course once we put our jacks in here, I'll wire the 75 ohm termination resistor between plus and minus at the jack, and That should do it as far as actually getting a signal to the set, and then we'll have to try to come up with an isolation transformer that maybe I can install in the bottom of the set here. And that's really about the only thing I know to do at this point. If you think I can think of any other way for me to do this easily, then I'm all ears. But right now I think we're just going to go with the isolation transformer mounted in the bottom of the cabinet there and let it go. And just to show you, this is a hot chassis. I have one side of our meter connected to the wide blade, which is the neutral side of the line. I have our meter set to measure continuity, and whenever I touch my meter probe to the metal tenor shield, you can see we have a direct short here. And of course, the same happens when I touch it to the ground lead. These are input leads that will soon be attached to jacks. Now, it was 100% certain that every outlet that this TV would be plugged into was wired correctly. It wouldn't be a problem at all. But as we've already discussed, that's not going to be the case. You know, it's been proven that a lot of outlets are miswired, so don't just rely on a polarized line cord to save the day. So we're just going to have to put a transformer in this if we can and try to make it as safe as possible. And this is our 75 ohm termination resistor. I didn't have the correct value, but two 150 ohm resistors in parallel gives us right on the money at 75 ohms, so that'll do. Well, I don't know what happened, but now that it's all back together, the picture's all wavy and negative and all this crap, so I don't know what could have taken place here. Now, what I just don't understand is how come when everything was jake-legged and running here, there, and yonder, it worked beautifully, and then whenever I fix everything up the way it's supposed to be fixed, then it does this crap. Alright, I moved my connection back down here to the IC with just a piece of unshielded hookup wire. And look at this. It seems to be doing fine and no buzz in the audio this time. Yeah, the picture looks perfect now. Well, I figured out what happened, and I should get the short bus award for today. I had the hot and negative on my video input reversed coming out of the converter box, so that's why it was misbehaving so bad. Alright, we're temporarily back together. This is on hold until I can get an isolation transformer and the proper jacks to put on the back, but we're working. It's amazing what reversing two wires can do.
He's also the...
Now, I have not made any effort to correct the geometry that's a bit off. That'll probably be the last thing I do once we get the transformer and the jacks installed. And then hopefully that'll be the end of this. I would like to adjust the contrast control, but I got so hasty in putting the back on, it kind of got pushed back up into the TV, so... Now, as far as an isolation transformer, the power requirements are 40 watts for this TV, and I think Antique Electronics Supply has one that's good for 50 watts, so that ought to be adequate. And when I go back in here, I'm probably going to disconnect everything from this tuner because there's just no need it even be in the circuit. Oddly enough, when I turn it, well, now it's not doing it. Ooh, we're going to get our hammock underwear on again.
Hammock underwear will end your adjustments once and for all. You don't realize you need new underwear until you try these. I'm on my feet all day. I'm up, I'm down. It's nice to have underwear that move with me and feel like they aren't there. Love your first pair or they're free. Upgrade to hammock underwear at Shinesty.com.
Hi, I'm Uncle Williams.
I'll make sure and go do that right now.
It doesn't last long. This is the time of the year to make sure you're in the right plan at the right price with the right coverage for you. Look, it's a lot to sort through on your own, with complex plans, changing coverages and benefits, or even knowing
I called to see what coverage and benefits.
Yeah, this is pretty much the kind of commercials you see on TV now. This, the ambulance chaser lawyers. I can remember a time when there were commercials for things such as cereal and bread and cold medicine and on and on and on, and they actually tried to make the commercials entertaining. Now the commercials are just nerve-wracking. It makes me just want to turn the TV off or give it the Elvis Presley treatment.
For next year,
I call every year to compare plans that fit my needs. It's a free call, free consultation, and there's no obligation. The Medicare annual enrollment period ends December 7th. Get started on your 3Cs and make the call to...
And they just keep going on and on and on and on.
819-1689. That's 800-819-1689. 800-819-1689.
We will go ahead and take HIV and say this is something that's completely preventable. We have enough on our plate.
what was it like to see two pandemics happening at once?
It's scary. I'm tired of people living with HIV on those streets.
And people wonder why I don't buy a new television. This is one of the reasons. Why? What's the point of buying a new TV? It's all garbage for the most part. And like I've said before, most of the content I watch is older stuff that was pre-HD, so me buying a new TV would just be stupid. And besides, I can keep all these old ones going. Can't really do that so much with these newer ones. Okay, I removed the back and got that contrast control straightened out where it can be adjusted. So that looks a little bit better, but this TV has a very nice picture, and it'll probably look a little better once I install the proper jacks and get rid of all of this mess of our alligator clips. Yeah, this would make a good for sale ad on Facebook Marketplace. For sale, vintage black and white TV with included isolation transformer that is necessary to use said TV. That should generate some comments. We got our jacks in today. I ordered 10 of them, and I decided not to go ahead and use left and right audio here because that would mess up my pairing, because chances are most of these are going to be, most of what's left is going to be used for stereo applications, and if I was to use another one of the jacks, then that would mess up my pairing. I would no longer have equal amounts of two pairs anymore. So if we need to connect stereo audio to this, I'll just use an external Y adapter. They're plentiful. Now, in order for me to mount these, I had to rip out everything, the baling and all that, the isolation network and all that from the antenna board here. And I had to enlarge the holes where the antenna terminals were to make the jacks fit. And I went ahead and disconnected everything from the tuner, since this TV is never going to be used for RF again. And I didn't even bother to put the IF chip back in. Like I said, this is not going to be used for RF ever again. It'll just strictly be a monitor, and we'll just leave it at that. As far as isolation is concerned, I've found some schematics on a few older monochrome monitors for computers that were basically just modified black and white televisions, especially one that Zenith made and one that the RCA made, one for the Radio Shack computer, and I think there was one or two others, Samsung I think. Every one of them use an isolation transformer except for the RCA model, which uses the optocoupler. Now, I could go that route, but I would have to build a circuit that not only includes the optocoupler, but some transistors and some supporting components. And for the audio, I could just use a one-to-one isolation transformer. But I've got an isolation transformer. Well, let me clarify. I have an AC mains isolation transformer on order, It'll be here whenever they decide to ship it, I guess. I'll probably end up mounting it to the underside of this UHF tuner. I'll just pop the cover off and mount it on there, and then snap the cover back in place, and then solder it to the tuner so it can't come off, and then that should take care of it. But right now we're going to put it all back together and use it on the external isolation transformer and see how it does. Alright, here we are back together, and eventually I'll put a label across here to designate which jack is which, but it's easy enough to remember A and V, but I will eventually put a label on that in case this winds up in somebody else's hands. They'll know what to plug into where. Alright, quite a pair. Let me get it off this copyrighted crap. Yeah, quite a pair. TV sitting on top of the isolation transformer and connected to a rating-looking converter box that was in a bad accident. And some rabbit ears, and something I didn't notice before, and you can't notice it as well on all scenes, but there is a little bit of a phosphor burn right there in the center of the screen here. Like I said, I did not notice that before. I don't think it's anything I've done to it, so who knows how that happened. But yeah, I'm really going to have more in this little ratting little TV than it's worth, but maybe it'll make a good educational video for those of you who might need to do this to a nicer looking set. And no, I have not done the geometry yet. Like I said earlier, that'll probably be the last thing we do.
As the hammer...
In the past, I've had TVs where there was a line burned across the center of the screen where the set lost vertical sweep, and the owners evidently kept running it just for the sound, and of course, as you know, especially with a very healthy CRT, when vertical collapses, you're going to have an extremely bright line, and it does not take long at all to burn a line into the tube. One set I remember was a 19-inch GE black and white, and I fixed it, got it working, but of course there was nothing I could do about the burn-in short of replacing the picture tube, and the TV obviously wasn't worth that. I sold it to a couple who wanted a inexpensive TV to put in their kid's bedroom, and apparently their kid was a bit destructive, and I think he'd already broken one or two TVs in the past, so they wanted something cheap to put in the kid's room in case he tore it up. They wouldn't be out much. Now, had I done something like that, if I'd have broken one TV maliciously, the first thing that would have happened is I'd have got a butt warming that I would have not forgotten, and my rear end would probably still be sore. And second of all, there would not have been a replacement TV provided. But you know, these kids today, over the past 25 or 30 years, what can I say? Well, it ain't the kids, it's the parents. I know a couple of years ago I had a lady, she bought a little flat screen TV that I had for I think $20, and she said she was tired of her grandson breaking TVs, so she said, I'm not buying him any more new ones. Buy him a cheap used one, and if he tears it up, then we're not out much. And I didn't say anything out loud because it was none of my business, but I was sure thinking, he needed to have torn his little behind up after he broke the first one and let him do without one for a good long while, and then maybe he would get a clue. And then I think another one I remember with a burned line was a 19-inch Toshiba color set, and I fixed it for a fella, and he didn't really mind the line burning the screen, so, you know, what can I say, you know. And this one here, when you're just watching it from a distance, you don't really notice that little spot in the center, but it's definitely there. Alright, so I guess that's all I've got for now until the isolation transformer comes in.
QOL poverty.
Now, I'll confess, the accident that happened to this converter box, this is one of those cheapy modern ones that's really not that great. I bought it because it had USB playback. It was actually acting really stupid one day, and I wasn't in a good mood, so I yanked it loose from the television and tossed it really hard over in the garbage pile with some more junk. And that's how it got broken, and after it sat there about a week, I'm like, well, let me just pull it out and see if it still does anything. So it still works, it's just falling apart. So one day maybe I'll try to put it back together, I don't know, but like I said in my other video about using a old school television in today's digital world, a good converter box matters, and this one is not a good one. I probably should have just left it on my trash pile, but it works, so I'll patch it back together some way or another. We can use it for testing purposes anyway. And by the way, this is the last day that we'll have daylight before 6 o'clock for a while. After today, it will be getting dark around 5 or a little before. I know we all have different opinions, but personally I don't like it getting dark at 5 o'clock. I especially don't like it getting dark and being cold at 5 o'clock, but that's just the way it is. But the good thing is, distant AM radio stations start coming in earlier in the day, so I can start getting WSM earlier. But anyway, let's talk about the hot chassis situation and isolation transformers and that sort of thing. I've drawn out a simplified drawing of the power supply in this television, which is just a simple half-wave rectifier and filter. So we have our hot side of the line, which is the narrow blade coming in through our fuse, through our switch, and then this capacitor here is our noise suppression cap, and we go through this diode, and then this filter capacitor, which is what, 470 microfarad, 150 volts, for the sake of argument. We'll say that's what it is. And then we have our B plus here, and everything here is referenced to the same common chassis ground. And if we look up at our video and AV input jacks, the ground terminal of those jacks is referenced to that same chassis ground as well. Alright, so let's assume we have this TV plugged into an outlet that's wired correctly. We have our hot side of the line, narrow blade going here. We have our neutral side of the line, wide blade going to ground. Now this is me here. Yeah, that's kind of a cute drawing of me, isn't it? Let's say I touch the exposed portion of this jack here while the set is plugged in, while I'm touching something with my other arm that has a return path to ground, which, by the way, our incoming AC is referenced to earth ground. Now, in this position here, there won't be any problem. But let's say this television was plugged into an outlet that was wired backwards, or let's say someone filed down the wide prong on the power cord to where it would the plug would fit into a non-polarized older outlet. Now, if that happens, now we have the hot side of the line going straight to circuit ground, and then the neutral side will be on the side here with our fuse. That's when things get very dangerous. In this situation, if I were to touch something on the set that's at ground potential, as in the outer conductor on these AV input jacks, while I was touching something with a return path to ground with my other hand, then that could very well be the last thing I ever touched. And if I had an AC operated piece of equipment plugged into this television with the latter situation that I explained. At the very, well, I don't want to say worst and best, so I'll just give a couple of scenarios as what could happen. You could make the case of the equipment plugged into it hot, or you could end up blowing up the piece of equipment plugged into it and your television. So obviously we don't want that. So how do we get around that situation? So what we need is a 1-to-1 isolation transformer. And what that simply is a device that if we put 120 volts AC into our primary winding, we get 120 volts AC out of our secondary winding, and the two windings are isolated from each other. Now there are various sizes of isolation transformers from like 15 watts all the way up to as big as you can imagine. Our television, the rating on the back of the set says 40 watts, so I ordered a 50 watt transformer, so that should handle it. But anyway, now we have our incoming AC, hot, narrow blade coming in through the fuse and the power switch on the television set, and then whenever it's turned on, then that completes the circuit back over here, back to our neutral side, and energizes the transformer. And then on the secondary side of the transformer, we go through our fuse on the television, our off-on switch, and through our diode, and we get B+ voltage out here, and it all comes back around and returns back to the bottom end of our secondary winding, as you can see. Now I drew a different ground symbol for this application. This is technically the symbol for chassis ground, meaning the chassis and the television. So in the output, in the isolation transformer also has a shield wire on it that connects to the core, and that should be, ideally, that should be connected to the isolated ground, or chassis ground in this case now. And if we wanted to go a step further, we could even put a 3-wire power cord on here if we wanted to, and which we may do, I don't know. So now, let's see what takes place. Now let's say I touch the outer conductor of the AV jacks here with one hand, while my other hand is in contact with something with a return path to earth ground. I'm not going to get popped this time, regardless of what position the power plug is oriented in the outlet, because we have this isolation transformer to isolate our primary side, which is referenced to earth ground, and our secondary side. So that's how we solve that situation. So I hope you have a little bit better understanding about why an isolation transformer is needed, especially whenever you're making modifications to a hot chassis device to accept inputs from other sources. Now I will give you a word of caution, and this is especially true with a lot of older tube-type black and white televisions, and probably some cheapo color sets too. Just because you see the presence of a power transformer on the chassis, that does not necessarily mean you have a cold chassis TV. For example, I've got a Crosley TV that you're going to see a video of one of these days. It's from about 1953, and the transformer in that set is simply just an autoformer that is used to supply voltage to the tube filaments, but the B+ voltage is derived straight from the power line, and an autoformer is just a, well, I'll draw it out for you here. So this is basically what an autoformer looks like. It's just a single winding that's tapped in various places, and then the bottom end of the winding is going to ground, and your variac is basically just a variable autoformer or auto transformer, if you prefer to call it that. So in a situation like this, this does not create a cold chassis, so you want to be careful of that. If there's any doubt, consult the schematic for the device that you're working on and make sure that it uses a transformer that provides isolation. Now, if your TV or whatever uses a conventional style power transformer like this, where you have a primary winding that receives 120 volts AC, and then you have our two secondary windings that provide 6.3 volts for all of the tubes except for the rectifier tube, and then you have a 5 volt winding for the, say, the 5U4 rectifier, and then you have like a center tapped 1000 volt winding for the B+, then you're okay. You don't need an external isolation transformer for this situation because the primary and secondary windings are all isolated from one another. But if it's something like an auto transformer where they're just using a transformer to obtain the needed filament voltages, then you will need an isolation transformer if you plan on adding an external input to such a television or radio or whatever. Now, in the case of a 5-tube radio, you might not have room to mount an isolation transformer inside of such a set, so in such a case you would probably just have to use a little 1-to-1 audio grade isolation transformer, and that should, for an AM radio, that would probably work just fine. But you know, for TV, we have audio and video to deal with, and I just really don't want to build a circuit using an optical isolator, so we already have the transformer on the way, so we're going to make the best of it. By the time I ordered everything I needed to build the optical isolator based circuit, and the time it would take to do it, I'd probably end up having just as much in it as what I'm going to have in it with the transformer, so we'll just go with the transformer. As a side note, the isolation transformer that I have on order for this TV can be configured to have the primary winding operate on either 120 volts or 240 volts, which is not something I really need, but if I wanted to, I could configure it to where the TV would operate on 240 volts if need be. But like I said, I don't need that. All I need is a 120 volt operation, but that was the only isolation transformer I could find that was heavy enough to handle this TV, so we take what we can get. And like I said before, I just hope I can make it fit inside of this cabinet some way. So yeah, this is our old trusty Heathkit variable isolated AC power supply that I've had for years. I got this and a few other things from a lady that her dad was a TV repairman back in the 70s, and then he had passed away, and she just wanted his stuff to go to somebody who could get some use out of it. She didn't want any money for it. She just wanted it to go to somebody who could use it rather than just throwing it in the trash. And those kind of people are getting few and far between, as are the remains of the old school TV repairmen, because most of those guys have long since passed away and their stuff has long since been gotten rid of already. But there's still stuff out there if you look and you talk to the right people. Now, whenever I was taking electronics in high school, that would have been 93 to 95, the isolation transformer they had was a Viz unit that was very similar to this Heathkit, except theirs only had a single meter. Therefore, you had to switch back and forth for reading voltage output or measuring current draw. And the thing I like about this Heathkit is we have 2 meters, one for current, one for voltage, so we can see both simultaneously. Now, to be honest with you, for the 2 years I was in that program, I think I'm the only one that ever used that isolation transformer, because by that time it was basically just a general electronics course, and they dealt with low voltages from the various DC power supplies that they had in the class. I was about the only one in there working on line-operated radios and TVs. That course started out back in the 40s as a general electronics course with an emphasis on radio repair. And then when TV came along later on, they added TV to the mix. But by the time I came along, they had pretty much stopped teaching any theory at all about radio and TV or the repair of said items, because by then the writing was already on the wall as far as consumer electronics repair. Now, there was one thing my instructor did that really pissed me off. There was a late 70s 19-inch RCA color TV with a built-in AM/FM radio that was a former motel set. It didn't have any knobs on it, and he was about to throw it away. I said, "Can I have that?" He said, "Yeah, you can have it." I said, "You wouldn't by chance have the knobs, would you?" "Well, yeah, I got them here somewhere, but I don't know where they are. I pulled them off of the TV whenever I decided I was going to throw it away and figured they might be needed for something." So I said, "Okay." So where I made my mistake is I repaired the television in the classroom. What I should have done was taken it home with me, and I think you probably know where I'm going with this. The television had a bad focus in G2 a jet control assembly. That was a high failure part on that chassis. I happened to have had a good one on a junk chassis at home, so I pulled the part off of my junk chassis, brought it up there, fixed the television, and I was all smiles because now I had me a 19-inch color TV that I could turn around and sell for about $75. Well, wouldn't you know it, he wouldn't let me have the TV after I fixed it, and I questioned him about it, and he said, "Well, if I let you take that TV home after you fixed it, I'd have to let everybody in the room take home everything they fixed." And I'm thinking to myself, what has anybody in here fixed so far? And I told him, I said, "Well, that ain't the point." I said, "The point is you gave me the television, and, you know, it should be mine. At that point, I considered it mine to do with as I saw fit. Well, you fixed it up here. I can't let you take it. About the best I can do, I can just give you an extra 100 as an extra credit grade." So I just let the subject drop because, you know, I was taught to be respectful of my teachers even when they're wrong. Oh, and wouldn't you know, he suddenly remembered where he put the knobs once I fixed the television. And for the 2 years I was down there, that television was what everybody in the classroom watched when they should have been working on stuff. I remember telling a few of my retired TV repairman friends that story, and they told me, well, had he pulled a stunt like that with me, that television would have got unfixed, and he could have just pitched a fit and sent me to the office or done whatever he wanted to do. And he said, and some of them said it would have probably got unfixed in a way where it would have never worked again. So, but I didn't push the issue. And then whenever I started electronics in college, the isolation transformers, and they had a bunch of these, were some 1960s era RCA isotap models. They were in a little square blue metal case, and they had a line selector switch, as well as 3 isolated outputs for low, medium, high, and 3 unisolated outputs for low, medium, and high. So with the combination of those outlets and the placement of the line selector switch, you could pretty much get any voltage that you needed to troubleshoot a television or whatever. Now, that particular instructor, I got a lot of stuff from him, but I never fixed any of it in the classroom. I don't think he would have pulled the stunt that the guy in high school did, but I just wasn't going to take any chances. You know how they say, when you get burned once, you're not likely to open yourself up to getting burned again. So actually my high school college instructor. I thought the world of him. He was a German guy that had taught there for 33 years. In fact, my first year was his last year. And like I said, he was a really good guy, and I thought a lot of him. He's gone now, but I always will think a lot of him. He was good to me, and he helped me out a lot. And when people would bring a TV in to be fixed, I was usually the one that fixed it, and sometimes I'd help him fix it, and then usually he'd slip me some money for doing so, even though I didn't want any money. I don't think he charged them anything. He was just giving me that money out of his own pocket, which there again, I didn't ask for it, but, you know, I think he thought a lot of me, and he was just proud to see what I was able to do, so that's the reason he did what he did. As far as my college electronics class, I don't remember how many we started out with, but the number who graduated was only a fraction of who started, and it wasn't because the course was all that difficult. It's because, quite frankly, I think a lot of guys enrolled in that thinking that it was just going to be a SOP course, or they weren't really serious in the first place. They were just there because Mama and Daddy told them, you're either going to go to enroll in college or you're going to get a job. So they enrolled in college. I know the guy that they paired me with is a lab partner. One day we were in lab, and our instructor got on to him about something. Now, he was professional. He didn't put him on blast in front of the whole room, but he did call his hand on something, and as soon as he walked off, the dude looked at me and said, I don't have to take this shit off of nobody. I'm out of here. And then I tried to stop him, but didn't do any good. He grabbed his stuff and walked out of there and dropped the program, and that was that. And I remember thinking, if you get that butt hurt over a teacher calling you down about something, then God help you when you get out in the real world. I mean, yeah, that same instructor has called me down before on stuff, but I didn't get in a butthurt rage and run out of there. He called me down, or he called his students down whenever they were doing things incorrectly or whatever. And that's the best kind of instructor to have. You don't want an instructor that's going to just pass you through. Like the math instructor I had in the 9th grade, pretty much if you showed up and wrote something down on the paper, you got a passing grade. And then the next year, I was failing all over the place, and she asked me, who'd you have last year? And I told her, and she said, oh, no wonder you're failing then. But as far as my college electronics class, like I said before, he retired after the first year, and then the guy they hired to take his place was he was a real dingbat. I don't even know what to think about him. He's one that he wanted us to come up with a relay driver circuit. I came up with something for him, and he swore it wouldn't work. And then he called the local parts house wanting to know if anybody there knew of a relay driver circuit they could provide for him. And the guy at the parts house, he thought it was a student calling, and he says, well, why don't you ask your instructor? And he's like, well, I am the instructor. Well, then I ended up building that little relay driver circuit to prove to him that it would actually work. So he didn't stay long. I think he stayed about a year after I graduated, and I think the college finally just booted him out. But that's the way it goes sometimes. Oh yeah, I'll tell you another story about that high school electronics instructor, the one that wouldn't give me the TV after I fixed it, and you'll love this. In the corner of the room, there was an old RCA Victor, probably a CTC 38, something like that, color console TV. The back cover was missing, nowhere to be found, and the picture tube was necked. It had probably been sitting there since before he started teaching there. Well, one day I asked him if I could cannibalize it for parts, so He said yes, so I pulled the chassis out of it, and I thought I'd have a little fun with him, and I pulled the Nivester tube out of the RCA tuner, and I took it over to him and I said, "Do you have any idea what this is?" And he looks at it and he said, "Integrated circuit?" And I thought to myself, here I am, one of your first year students, and I know more about what this is than you do. So that right there ought to give you an idea about what we were dealing with there. But yeah, I thought that was a bit comical and a bit sad at the same time, that we had this electronics instructor that had supposedly been around the block, as they say, and I showed him a Nivester tube out of a TV tuner, and he thought it was an integrated circuit. But it all goes back to just because they got the job to teach, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the most qualified to teach. A lot of these folks got the job because nobody else applied for it, and that's all they could get. Alright, so enough rambling on about my old electronics instructors. Hopefully we'll get that isolation transformer very soon, and then we can get this thing fixed up. Alright, our isolation transformer just came in, a little bit on the big side, so I hope we can fit that in there some sort of a way. Alright, we can fit it in the bottom of the cabinet that way. I'm really not too enthused about having a transformer mounted directly to a plastic cabinet, but hopefully it won't get too hot. I know I've seen little table radios with the transformer mounted directly to the bottom of the plastic cabinet, and they fared okay, so maybe this will too. Alright, this is an N68X, which has a dual voltage primary, either 115 volts or 230 volts. And for use with 115, we tie the black and the red black together, and then the yellow black and the green black together. And then if we were using 230, we would tie the yellow black and red black together and apply our incoming AC to the black and green black, and then for 115 we'd apply the incoming AC to yellow, black, and black, and then of course red as our secondary. Okay, these two large traces are where our AC power cord once connected, and these two smaller pads here are where the off-on switch once connected. Well, our off-on switch is now going to be in the primary side of the transformer, so we'll just go ahead and jump that out where the original switch was. Alright, we have a camera that's going out of focus, but we have our off-on switch connection on the circuit board jumped, and we have our secondary winding going into where the original power cord connected to the chassis. Alright, we have everything mounted in place. We have our shield going to isolated ground. That's the core of the transformer. Then we have our hot side narrow blade of the power cord coming in through this terminal, through the fuse, and then coming out of the fuse. We go to one side of the switch, and then the other side of the switch goes to one end of the primary winding of the transformer. And then our neutral side of the power cord connects to this terminal here, which in turn connects to the other end of our primary winding on the transformer. So we're fuse protected on the primary, and then we're fuse protected again on the secondary. So we ought to be good to go now. And there we are. We're working. So I'm going to just let this run a while, make sure this doesn't get overly hot, and then we're going to put it back together and watch some TV on it without the need of an external isolation transformer. Looking at this contrast pot, the one I accidentally pushed back up in the set whenever I was putting the back on it, that looks like a replacement, and I know I'm not the one that replaced it, so I think somebody probably worked on this before and just jake-legged whatever kind of old pot they could find to put in there. But that doesn't look factory to me.
here in the Jeffersonian.
Alright, we now have the converter box connected to the television set, and we now have a very nice picture, and as you can see, no external isolation transformer in sight, and nothing blew up whenever I plugged in the converter box, so we're in good shape now. As far as this mounting, we've got some space between the bottom of the transformer and this cabinet here. It's recessed down in this area, but I don't think this is going to get really hot enough to be a detriment to this plastic. We just let it play for several hours, and if there's no problems, then we'll call it a day. Alright, we're still running. Everything's fine. This transformer's pretty toasty, as I expected it would be, but it doesn't appear that it's getting hot enough to cause any detriment to this cabinet. But anyway, as far as what we did to this television, you might be thinking that's a convenient way to add composite input to an older television, so you can use things like DVD players and game consoles and that sort of thing. I'll just tell you this: if your television has a tuner and IF strip that's working satisfactorily, then I would not suggest going to all this effort to get composite input on your TV. If all of that is good that I mentioned, you'd be a lot better off just to simply get an RF modulator that will accept a composite video signal plus the left and right audio from a DVD player, game console, VCR, whatever, and then it will convert that into an RF signal that can be received on a TV on channels 3 or 4, whichever you have the modulator set to. The only time I would suggest doing something like what we've done here is if you have a television with a jacked up tuner or IF strip that's not economical to fix, and in such a case you'd be better off just to do what I did here, just add an isolation transformer and convert it to a composite monitor and be done with it. Now, like I said before, if your television uses an isolated ground, then of course you won't need the isolation transformer. And before you go about converting a set to composite, I would suggest getting a schematic for your television, and the most common place to find a schematic is a Sam's PhotoFact, and that way you can see exactly where the composite video needs to be injected usually right after the detector diode, and you need to make sure your video is compatible with the television, is in 1 volt peak to peak, 75 ohm load. And I think most modern televisions, that will probably be okay. Well, I say modern, I mean let's just say semi-modern, but there were a lot of older sets that required a different type of video signal, or a video signal stronger than 1 volt, and those kind of situations can be a little challenging. So, number one, make sure you're dealing with a set with an isolated ground. Number two, make sure your set is compatible with a modern day 1 volt peak to peak signal, 75 ohm impedance, and then you should be good to go. I guess tomorrow, it's getting kind of late now, we'll connect a pattern generator to this and tweak the geometry a little bit, and then we'll put this joker back together and call it done. Well, in about 2 hours, all of these political ads will be over with for a while, because the polls close at 7 p.m. And believe me, I'll be happy to not see all these political ads again for a while.
November 7th. Thank you.
With moderate to severe fire.
Yeah, just turn the contrast down a little bit. It was a bit too high.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, you know.
Yeah, if it wasn't for political ads and ambulance chaser lawyers, these TV stations wouldn't have a lot of revenue anymore.
Follow News 11 on Facebook and at WTOK.com. Follow News 11 on Facebook and at WTOK.com.
I heard you the first time. I think that hum bar we see in the picture is coming from the converter box. I remember it had an issue, seems like, with that from time to time. Alright, somebody in master control, get your head out of your butt and let's get it on the air now. Thank you.
Election day is here. We're now 2 hours out from polls closing in Mississippi. We're looking ahead to many local races here in East Mississippi. Also, the Magnolia State is not alone. Other states across the nation are heading to the polls tonight, voting on governor seats and abortion laws.
And the day is coming to a close, and the polls are going to be closing soon. Temperatures outside are sitting very nice and warm, so it's safe for you to head on out there until the polls close. But I'll have a full forecast for you coming up later.
Live from downtown Meridian, always local, always on. This is WTOK News 11 at 5.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is Election Day in Mississippi and in many other states across the nation. You've only just got about 2 hours now to get out and cast your vote. Tonight, we're following all the big races across our area and across the state of Mississippi. We kick off our News 11 team coverage in Lauderdale and Clark counties. First up, News 11's Anna Williams joins us live from the North Park Church voting precinct here in Lauderdale County. Anna, a big election night, lots of high-profile races.
I'm here. All right, I'm here live at the North Park Church, where, as you can tell, voter turnout has been very steady. Ever since I've got here, people have been coming in and out, casting their votes. It is great to see this turnout.
Guess I could turn the camera
So have until 7 o'clock tonight to
this
come out
way
and cast your vote, and I definitely encourage you to do so. With me, I have Mr. Jim Nelson. He is a precinct worker here, and can you tell us a little bit about how voter turnout has been throughout the day today?
Yeah, that black bar is not visible in person. That's a camera artifact.
Which is good.
Okay, and I know as a precinct worker, you probably have some opinions on why people should come out to vote. So why should people take initiative and come out to vote tonight?
If you don't exercise your right to vote now, you're going to lose it. Our grandkids are in jeopardy of not being able to vote and control their own destiny in the United States.
Absolutely. So you heard it from Mr. Jim. You need to come out and vote. There are lots of big races happening here in Lauderdale County tonight. We're definitely watching the sheriff's race, the coroner's race, and, of course, everybody's watching the governor's race tonight. So we will keep you updated with that throughout the evening at WTOK. We'll still have time to come out and vote again until 7 o'clock this evening. So please do so. Exercise your right to vote. All right, live from North Park Church, I'm Anna Williams, WTOK News 11. Back to you, Emily.
All right, thank you so much, Anna. Now we turn to Clark.
October 15th.
All right, I connected the TV to another box, and that hum bar is still there, so we're going to have to look into that and try to figure out the source of that and correct it if we can. I did play with the vertical size control, and I tweaked the deflection yoke a little bit to get the picture a little more straighter. See, when there's writing on the screen, you can see the... So yeah, we're going to have to look at some caps and make sure all those are okay. And there's that little burn mark in the center, but like I've already said, there's really not anything I can do about that. It is what it is, but this TV's got a pretty good picture on it. It'd be even better if we can just get the source of that hum taken care of. Alright, we've got the TV back together, and I've done about as much as I'm going to do with it. That hum bar is still a bit present. Sometimes it's noticeable, sometimes it's not, but it's really not bad enough that I'm going to worry about it. I tried to eliminate it by checking and replacing capacitors. I didn't really find any capacitors that checked all that bad, but I found a few that were, one of them had some crust on the bottom from where it had been leaking, and another one was deformed a bit on the bottom, so its days were numbered. So I went ahead and replaced them anyway. Let's see if I can find that one that was deformed on the bottom. That's not it. Here's the one that was a bit deformed on the bottom. 2.2 at 150. That was in the audio circuit. And here's the one that was a little crusty on the bottom. A 4.7 at 160. That was the boost filter. And that's a high failure part anyway. But oddly enough, when I bypassed the transformer and went directly into the television chassis, the hum bar was better. So I tried disconnecting the shield from the transformer. That didn't help. I tried connecting small value capacitors from each side of the AC line to ground. That didn't help either. So this is just going to have to be one of those it is what it is kind of things. It's still highly watchable, and we're doing good. This TV is working as good as it is, because it would have probably ended up getting thrown in the garbage dump had I not rescued it and decided to turn it into something usable. And there's our Y adapter that will remain on the television. That's so we can connect our left and right audio together and get a mono signal. Well, I had to go back in here and tweak the vertical height a little bit. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing and tweaked it a little bit too much before. And we got MacGyver on one of our channels. Used to watch that show religiously whenever I was a kid.
Challenging, but it's helped a lot of.
Eddie, get up to 36 months, get your free financing, or cap on you.
A flea.
Yeah, a flea.
I'll be even up for it.
Bro. The idea
is I did it.
Different way.
And get the most.
Thank you, Matt.
La lista alcohólica. You can solve about 6 people
of his marriage. He came to them with concerns, of course.
They take him on in like 23 vision of a came to the house and said it's super empty.
Railing the president's remarks in Illinois today, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Biden administration has said it doesn't believe a ceasefire in the Middle East. There are intense protests.
All right, there we go.
On college
it seems
campuses
to be working pretty good now. So
students are quite
that's
divided
about all I've got for this one.
For Israel. National correspondent Maya Rodriguez is live now.
Like I think I've already said, if your television has a tuner and IF strip that is in satisfactory condition, then I would not recommend making this modification. Just buy an RF modulator and go through channel 3 on the tuner that you've already got. But this is a good way to save an old TV that might otherwise not be worth doing anything with if it has a severely jacked up tuner or IF strip or something like that. You can just put composite input jacks on it and use it that way. Now, back when everything was still analog, this probably wouldn't be the best method unless you used an old VCR for a tuner. But now that everything's digital anyway, and since most everything as far as DTV converters and older DVD players, and some game consoles have composite video and audio out, then there's just really no sense in fooling around with a jacked up tuner. Just bypass it and be done with it.